Hi, this is Matt Johnson with Viral Marketing, and welcome to the latest edition of Business Transformations on Air, hosted by Growth Source Coaching and Steve Smith. And I'm so excited for this one. This is going to be a great hangout. You're going to learn how to waste time and money by solving the wrong problem. And hopefully we're going to also talk about how to avoid that. So, Steve, just wanted to welcome you today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thanks for hosting this hangout today.
Yeah, this is going to be a really good one. So, if you guys have any questions right here within Google Plus on the Q&A app, you can type in your question. That way I can bring it to Steve and he can answer it right on the Hangout. But let's dive right in. So this is something that we talked a while back about, and we haven't. We're just now getting to the point where we can do a special interview about it. So we've talked about all this stuff off camera, but for the people that aren't in the know, you've got kind of a question framework for how to approach problems that come up in your business. And so kind of set the scene for me, like when you're working with clients, how does this come up and why are you taking them through this framework to begin with?
Well, typically what happens is a problem will emerge. It may be something that the business owner has stumbled on themselves, or it may be something that's been presented them, even a staff member, an employee inside, maybe a client outside. But whatever the case is, it's something that's unexpected. It's something that now they have to do something about. And that very point right there, at the very start of understanding what the problem is, that's the point where you have to really start thinking strategically about the direction you take your problem solving. Because the default response is to react. And reaction is based almost totally on emotion. So depending on the severity of the problem, what you think the problem could lead to, that's going to depend on the severity of the emotion, which could lead you to making a kind of a knee-jerk decision about fixing it, and it doesn't really fix it. It either prolongs it or it just trades that problem for another problem down the road.
Yeah, the odds of reacting emotionally and striking magically upon the right solution to that problem are pretty slim.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the reason why I tell people, that at the very beginning, when a problem is presented to you, and sometimes we're talking about nominal problems that other people who have served them up have found ways to make urgent. Okay, so urgent doesn't always mean important, but to somebody it's urgent, which is why they're bringing it up. Or it could be a genuinely severe problem that could lead to some loss of revenue, some problem with the structure of your business, something big enough that if you don't do something with it, things are going to get bad real quick.
Yeah, and that's really the key. So the first thing you take clients through is really examining, okay, first of all, is this a problem at all? And okay, what are the consequences if this really does go wrong, or if you don't solve this problem correctly? Here's the negative consequences, and what really are they? And then what are some of the other steps you take them through just to work out, what the problem really is and whether it's actually a problem that they need to solve, and kind of how to take just that very first step in the framework.
Okay. I'll look at it two ways. One, there are problems that you genuinely need to be taking control of and working towards a favorable outcome. And then there are other problems that basically people will bring to you hoping that you will solve it for them. Okay? That's what I call who has the monkey. And that's an interesting little concept in especially people in areas of authority. People that are genuinely nice and want to help other folks and have kind of an open door policy, what you find over time is that you start to attract other people's problems. Because what they really want is they want you to take the problem and solve it.
Right.
And if you're looking at trying to teach your management team or the ranks within your employees how to solve their own problems, taking the problem and solving it for them doesn't help. So there's a whole process for helping guide people through solving their own problems, taking responsibility for handling the things that they're there to do, that they've been hired to do. And so that's one side of it. The other side of it is when the problem is generally big enough that you need to deal with it. You need to figure out where to go with it, what to do with it, how it's going to end up so that hopefully you either minimize the impact or you've gotten rid of it altogether. And so the first thing I try to help people feel, to get to is getting really clear about what the problem is. Okay? Many times what's been served up to you is the effect. It's not the cause. So you've really got to be able to sit there, and this is, again, where you have to separate the emotion from the clear-headed approach, and you've got to really sit there and figure out, okay, what exactly are we talking about? What is the nature of this problem? Sometimes what you're going to find is that it may not be anything you want to even deal with. Maybe it's a problem of a one-time nature that when it comes and goes, you make a course correction in your strategy and you move on. But you don't spend a lot of time dealing with something that is not likely to come back because of the nature that surrounds it. That's why clarity about what the problem actually is so important.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting, because it's true in people and it's true in businesses. So every strength is a weakness, right?
Yes.
So the things that make you or give you a competitive advantage in the marketplace is also the things that will come back to bite you occasionally. And that's one of those things where you have to look at it, okay, this is one of the areas where I'm really good at, but the flip side of it has a weakness. I can't spend all my time trying to correct for that weakness to the point where I lose my competitive advantage, or the thing that makes me unique in the market.
Yes.
So that, yeah, I can see that definitely coming up a lot in a lot of businesses where certain problems crop up. Let's say your competitive advantage is speed. Well, of course, you're going to get along with that sometimes sloppiness. Somewhere a ball is going to be dropped and the client is going to be unhappy, but you can't then throw a bunch into the gears and slow everything down when your main advantage is, whether it's speed to market or just adaptability and bringing products to market and things like that. So let's move on to the next kind of step in the framework. So let's say you're looking at like what the nature of the problem is. So whether it's something that comes up occasionally or not. Let's say it's something that you figure out really does need to be addressed. It's not something you can necessarily ignore. It's a one-time problem. It's definitely something that you need to address.
Yes.
Or something that has consequences. So what's the next step to looking outside of that, looking at your industry and seeing how you match up to your competitors?
Okay, that's a good point, because at this stage of the game, there's what I call the fact-gathering phase. And I find this to be a real problem for people who are kind of A-types in the way they run a business, kind of command and control folks. They want to make that decisive decision, move forward, throw the edicts out of who does what, and just keep the thing moving, right, when they haven't really clearly diagnosed the nature of the problem. And we're not talking about things that take long, long periods of time. What I'm simply talking about is finding the individuals who are in the best position to help you understand the nature of the problem. And that could be inside your company. It could be outside your company. It could be colleagues running other businesses in your industry or in businesses like yours, to be able to go and ask questions. The biggest way to clarify and get really down to the core of what is driving the problem, what's creating the problem, is to ask really good questions. Not questions that automatically confirm what you already think, but good open-ended questions that invite perspectives and new learning about a situation, so you can really almost test your own head and say, okay, here's what I think's going on, but am I right? You may not be. And sometimes people have been in businesses for long periods of time when the industry around them has changed. Maybe the customers they're serving are now changing. Sometimes your perspective can be a little dated. And when you go into solving a problem with a perspective that's based on things that happened 10, 15 years ago, sometimes, gosh, in society today, stuff changes so quick, you could be dated with a 3-year-old mindset. But that's the reason for going to other folks and inviting feedback, asking the right kind of questions to get to the bottom of what they know, what they can verify. Get your arms around as many facts as you possibly can, because there's opinion and supposition and all this kind of stuff, and then there's facts. And you want enough facts to be able to say, okay, this is actually what we're dealing with, not everybody's impression of X.
Mm-hmm. And another part of that we talked about when we first kind of sketched all this out and came up with the topic and all this was the idea that there's some problems out there that, yes, they're a problem, yes, they exist, but they're a problem that everybody in your industry faces. And you mentioned one of them, which is the constant speed of change. So if you're in any kind of tech business, if you're in anything that's heavily influenced by technology, marketing for us is very much like that, where everything is changing day to day. That in itself is going to create problems, but it's a problem that everybody else in the industry has. Now, in the circles that you move in with a lot of your clients coming from, whether it's heavy industry, manufacturing, logistics, like that world, they're not used to that speed of change. I mean, anybody that's been around marketing or computers or anything like that for the last 10 or 20 years, they get that part of it. But some of those other industries have been kind of insulated from that pace. And so they're not used to that, like the pace of things changing and starting to accelerate now.
Well, and you're exactly right. In the high-tech field, and I have many friends and people that own businesses in those particular disciplines, they fully understand the need for change, the need for staying current, and for using basically the best applications for the business you have. Most everybody outside of that doesn't have a really good appreciation for that. Now, I'm going to say something that sounds a little contradictory in that. Sometimes the best current technology isn't necessary to solve a technical problem. Sometimes the non-technical solutions are actually a better way to go. And when you get into businesses like, let's say, law practices, where you have to move around a lot of documents, and that industry is moving very quickly towards a digital world in order to facilitate all of the information that's being disclosed, during lawsuits and things like that. You also have manufacturing and kind of commercial businesses where processes have to be documented, and all these things have to be put together for the employees that are mandated by the state. So you have a lot of things that it's just not practical for individuals to manually handle anymore, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have the highest tech that's available in the market today. So sometimes when you look at those kind of situations, you have to ask yourself, what's the best way for me to manage the problem that I have now and balance out my need for any heavy investment in systems or infrastructure when that may not be the best way to handle it today? Most of the time, and I'm sure you can probably, you've probably experienced this before yourself, you buy a new computer. When you're up and running with that computer and bringing all the knowledge and experience you have with computers to that new unit you just bought, what percent of that unit's capability do you think you're using?
Probably about as much as the human brain.
Yeah, 8 to 10% if you're really good. So when you're looking at a problem that has a technical solution to it, the knee-jerk reaction is, well, I just need to go buy a bigger, better unit. That's not always the case. Sometimes the case is you need to learn how to do things more efficiently with the technology you have and get more out of the existing resources that are available to you. So that's all part of making bad decisions when you have enough of the right things in front of you. But you need to get clear about what the real problem is. You need to invite feedback in from people around you that can help you understand what your options are. And then you need to be able to make decisions that solve the problem and not just address your own personal desire for having the biggest and the best and the latest, but actually dealing with the problem that's affecting your business.
Yeah. And you mentioned something earlier about the getting the input and kind of in that fact gathering phase. And one of the things that you pointed out off air to me that I wanted to make sure people got out of that was in that fact gathering phase to make sure that you reach out to people that are either in your industry looking for an industry solution that somebody's already come up with to your problem, and then also looking at other industries, seeing how they've solved similar problems, because we get so siloed sometimes.
Yes.
We look at just we're so caught up in just what's our process and how are we with our competitors, that there may be another industry that has long ago solved that problem some other way, technologically or not, that it just hasn't made its way into your industry. And so the more people you can pull on in other industries, or the more you can pull on someone like Steve that works with people in all these disparate industries, you can get the benefit of that knowledge of how other industries have solved your problem, because the solution may already exist.
And I'll be honest with you, in 98% of the circumstances, the solution already does exist. It may be masked because it's being used in a discipline that seems unfamiliar to what you're doing. So you're right. Reaching out to other people that you trust their judgment. They may not have to be an expert in the specific area you're trying to figure out. You just need to talk to somebody that can help you unravel the emotional pull that's being exerted on you because there's pressure to solve the problem. You may have clients that are threatening to leave because this thing exists. You may have employees. You may have one of your best employees may have just left or given notice because they just can't work under these circumstances anymore. And you're afraid that if it gets out, you might have other people do the same thing. So a lot of times we can build up in our head a certain amount of magnitude over what's going to happen that most of the time never really happens at all, but it's our way of dealing with the stress and the pressure of problems. So so finding people that you can talk to. Now, here's a caveat to that, and I've seen this happen before too. You should limit the people that you have in your inner circle. I suggest you have no more than about 4 people that you can reach out to that are in very specific disciplines or areas or knowledge bases that you can tap into. The reason why? The more people you bring into your query for information, the more disparate opinions you have to deal with. At some point, the original problem goes away. Now the problem becomes, how do I make sense of this dozen or more opinions that I've just been handed, none of which speak to, none of them are lined up. They all come from very specific areas based on those people's own influence and interests. So now I'm having to manage a lot of input that seemingly doesn't go together. So yeah. I've seen that happen too, where people are on the phone all day long calling everybody they know, asking them the same thing and getting a completely different response. That does not help.
Okay, so having a small kind of mastermind or almost your own personal board that you
yes.
can go to, and being very specific and targeted with who you go to the problems, the people that are the smartest and have the most balanced opinions for you.
Yeah, and sometimes I know a handful of people now that don't necessarily, they're not the smartest and the brightest, but what they're really good is asking questions of me to help me get clear about what I'm even dealing with. Because sometimes I can get up in the ether too, and all of a sudden I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. I just need to know I need to do something quick. And so I'll talk to these folks and I'll say, okay, let's go through this process. And you'd be amazed at when you're having to explain the problem to someone else, especially someone that's not close to it. They're not in the same business. They don't have the same, they don't have their skin in the game. Okay, when you're explaining it to them, just you hearing you talk about it can really add some clarity to what you're actually dealing with. And there's an approach. And you can go online and Google it. There's a lot of different articles that have been written about it, but it's called the Socratic method. And it's based on Socrates and how he helped people realize their own potential through a questioning method. And the whole idea was to get people to basically think about what is important to them, why they want to do it, what their options are, and they kind of roll through that process by themselves. I use that quite a bit in my own coaching approach, because once people really understand what they're dealing with and they recognize that there is a solution and they can actually do something to correct it, the empowerment level you give people to actually go out and fix the problem goes way up, because now they feel like they have control over it. Now it's not something that's just been dumped on their desk and, oh my God, if I don't do anything with this, I'm dead and I don't know what to do with it. Once you can feel like you understand what it is and you recognize that there's options you can choose from, and you can simply execute the best option, the one you choose, and you can fix it, there's a level of confidence that emerges that allows people to actually get out of the heat of the moment and take good actions that are going to either eliminate it or vastly reduce it to where it's not a problem.
Yeah, and not to get too far off track, I don't want to go on a huge bunny trail, but it does bring me back a little bit to the very first solo interview that you and I did, which is all about prioritizing your time and being able to decide what you should really be spending your time on, where the highest impact is, and then eliminating or delegating the other things. And to me, that is such a huge part, because if you don't have that down, you're much more likely that when problems arise to react, because mentally you feel like you don't have the time to deal with it. You feel like you don't have time to take that space,
yes,
go through the fact-gathering phase, and ask yourself those questions. So you're like, I don't have time to deal with this, react, and moving on. If you have that down, if you have your priorities in line to where you have that time and space to think, then when that problem comes up, you're not drowning in everybody else's urgent priorities that you feel like you have to get done for them, and you actually have that time to go through that process and that framework.
Right. And really, dealing with problems, making good resolving problems is really just a function of being good with making decisions. And a big part of learning how to make decisions and go through a predictable mental process of getting there is recognizing that if you spend 5 minutes, if you actually set your watch and spent 5 minutes thinking critically about this, what you'd realize, it's not going to ruin the rest of your day because you have other things you need to do and they're all kind of begging for your attention. You're just realizing that in the grand scheme of things, time is actually kind of relative to what you're working on. Every minute is the exact same distance from one to the next, this day and next. But sometimes we can sit there and think, God, I don't even have 10 minutes to worry about this. Yes, you do. You just need to be able to get clear about what you're working on and eliminate the overwhelm from the clutter and all the other stuff that's just barking at you, and just look at it, just drill deep into it. Do things like brainstorming. I know that's one thing that we're going to talk about here, but that's a great way to solve problems, not only to get to a solution, but to have people around you actually take charge of implementing the solution so you can go back to doing the stuff you're supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was just going to say, I don't know if you've had this experience, Steve, but if you take a plane flight and you have nothing to do but just think, it's amazing how when you step out of that, out of the business, all the ideas and all the solutions that start to come that you wouldn't have thought of just going through the day-to-day.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But you can get that piece of it. Like that's an extreme example of when you have nothing to do and your mind just is able to kind of relax. But you can get a taste of that if you develop the mental discipline to get into that headspace a little bit every day, whether it's 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. You can develop that ability to step into that mental space and come up with those creative solutions on a daily basis rather than it just being that one big spike, every few months when you get a few hours to yourself.
The two most common activities people get into that produce those types of random brain waves, where the kind of the eureka moment happens and all of a sudden a solution just presents itself to something you've been worried about. The two most common activities are driving a car and taking a shower. Because during those moments, you're not really thinking about anything specifically. Most of the time, they've taken enough showers and they've driven enough cars to where it's kind of an automatic behavior. And so that's what allows your mind to kind of drift a little bit and to get into these other areas that invite solutions, things that are already sitting in your head just waiting to be queued up. So what I tell a lot of my clients who struggle with this is take a few times during the day. It doesn't have to be more than 15 or 20 minutes. Get out of your building. Go walk around your parking lot. Put some iPhone headphones in and listen to music that you like to listen to, jazz, classical, whatever it is that kind of just allows you to wander mentally. And just go walk a couple of laps. You'd be amazed at not only how calm you become, how clear you get, but the rush of ideas that just start hitting you because you've kind of quieted your mind and you've allowed all those great things that are sitting in the back there to start queuing up.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's Norwegian death metal, but I get the principle. All right, so let's get into the fun part. So the brainstorming session, you had some really great points that I want to make sure that we get to in the next like 6 or 7 minutes that we have left. So tell me about, and this is obviously based on your background in the executive role that you were in before getting into business coaching. So tell me a little bit about how you would recommend somebody run a brainstorming session at that executive or maybe the business owner level where you have people underneath you that you can pull on that can then implement those things that come out of those sessions.
Okay. And I'll tell you a very quick session that you can run in exactly 7 minutes. Okay? Now, these are actually some of the best ones. But what you do is you get your team together, and you shouldn't have more than maybe 6 or 7 people max. That's really all you need. Okay? You need a whiteboard or something to write on, and you should have somebody that kind of facilitates it. And here's what I'm going to suggest. In any business where you have a staff or a team under you, appoint someone else to run the brainstorming session. If you are the person at the top, the thing you need to be sitting back is observing, taking in what comes out of the session, not mechanically trying to run the thing. So put one of your managers, one of your C-level people that reports to you, put them in charge of running the session. All right? The big key to brainstorming is allowing people to throw out whatever comes into their head without judgment. So the first thing I tell people is do not respond to anything during the initial gathering phase. Whatever people tell you, just write it down. You don't tell them, oh, gee, we've tried that before, that didn't work. That kind of stuff kills brainstorming activity. So you really have to create an environment where people know that for the next 7 or 10 minutes, whatever you say it doesn't hurt you, it doesn't affect you, it's just simply getting ideas out so you can catalog them and look at them later. But once you take a minute to identify what the problem is that everybody's going to be working on, you invite people for another 2 minutes to ask clarifying questions so that everybody in that team of 6 or 7 sees the problem the way you've identified it. And you'd be amazed, too, by the kind of questions come back that will tell you how many people don't really understand it or don't really see it the way you see it. And it's important that everybody's on the same page trying to solve the same thing. After that, you take exactly 4 minutes to let everybody brain dump. Just throw out the ideas. And we're not talking about long dissertations. We're talking about short statements that they think will help. It doesn't matter how bizarre these things are. You just simply write them down. Sometimes when we've done this, we've had as much as 80 and 100 different comments about possible solutions. So you write all these down. Bring a tape recorder with you. You can record the whole thing, and that way it's easier to kind of catalog these things later. But once you get those all written down, the last minute you basically just reserve for telling people what the follow-up is going to be, because going through a brainstorming session without having any follow-up is worthless. So at that point, it's, okay, we're going to take these things back, and in the next 24 hours, we're going to go through everything and synthesize it down to what we think is actionable, and then we're going to invite you back to help us figure out how to implement. So now what you're walking away with, which on the surface might seem like solutions or ideas that have no merit, you'd be amazed when you get away from that and you start cataloging these things down and you start putting them together to get into areas of commonality, that some of the most outrageous comments actually have merit. But it's because you're looking at them critically, you're not looking at them emotionally. And that's the real key to getting brains. It's like having 7 people taking showers all in different places, and you've tapped into their heads, and you're just pulling out all the random thoughts that come out of it. You're basically trying to recreate that safe zone where people can just throw out whatever comes to them in an effort for you to find a new creative way to solve an old problem.
Yeah, and you can do this on your own too. So I was reading a copywriting book by one of the greats, Joseph Sugarman, and he was talking about how when he's going about solving a copywriting problem, if he's stuck, if he has kind of writer's block, he would go and literally just write down the first 3 words or the first 3 nouns that he thought of, and then come up with a story out of those 3 words as a way to sell the product or service he was trying to sell in print. And so you can do some of that free associative stuff on your own if you're looking for ways to solve problems. Just come at it from a different perspective, pull some, a bunch of disparate things together and challenge yourself to come up with a solution out of 2 or 3 random things. You never know what can come out of that. So you can kind of jumpstart yourself mentally that way.
And for me, there's times when I'm between appointments or I'm out, at lunch someplace, and all of a sudden I'm just really not concentrating on anything in particular, and all of a sudden just a wave of thoughts just comes flying at me. So I use this little app on my phone that's also on my tablet and it's also on my computer at home. It's called Evernote. And it's been out for a number of years. Most people have heard of it. But it's such a great little tool because when you're in that situation where you're kind of having your own brain dump, you just open that thing up and you just start typing random comments. They don't have to be in any particular order. And the minute you stop, it saves it. You come home, you open up your computer, and all that stuff's there. Now you can look at it and say, okay, which one of these things was just a great idea in the moment that's not going to go anywhere, and which one of these actually has viability to it? And so I find most of the time when I get my greatest solutions to problems I've been working with, I'm not at my desk. I'm someplace else where I can't really do anything about it. So that's how I figured out how to capture that moment and go back and look at it later on when I have the ability to actually do something with it.
Yeah. Very cool. So we covered how to run and then how to kind of get those solutions implemented quickly. So you delegate, and then there was one thing you mentioned that I wanted to make sure people got was the kind of the quick course corrections. Like take that minute at the end of the brainstorming session, figure out, the next step is just to evaluate all that stuff, figure out what solution you're going to implement, get it into place as quickly as possible, and then just make the course corrections to kind of find your way to the right solution rather than trying to come up with the perfect one right away.
Very, very rarely when you come up with a theoretical solution, unless you've been down this road before and you've kind of learned how to figure it out along the way, is that one solution going to be the perfect fit. So many times what's really important is just taking action and starting to work on the thing, and as you run into little snags or things that maybe you didn't think about before, you can course correct, you know. But ultimately, the biggest reason why problems end up getting to the fire alarm stage is because people don't address them soon enough, appropriately enough, and they don't take any meaningful action on actually trying to solve it. A lot of times I get these comments like, well, if I just wait long enough, it'll go away. You know, it's like in California. If you wait 15 minutes, the weather changes. Well, you can't do that when a problem is affecting some aspect of your business, because if it's really bad, if it's really the underpinnings of something that could catch legs and do damage, the longer you wait, the bigger your problem becomes, and eventually you're at a point where you really can't do anything about it.
Yeah, which is a perfect segue back to really understanding and getting clarity on the core issue, because that's where everything else stems from, and how you attack the solution, how quickly you get it implemented, whether you really attack it at all comes down to your understanding of what the core issue is and what the consequences are if you don't deal with it, and what your time frame is for dealing with it. If you don't understand those things up front, you're going to get off track when you either implement a solution, you're not going to implement one at all, or you're not going to implement one in time to actually have an effect.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's react versus act.
Mm-hmm.
And I suggest to people, figure out in your own emotional makeup what you need to do to create that automatic pause, so that you don't fly into reaction mode. You've heard of the people that are hip shooters. They shoot first and then they aim later. I mean, there's a lot of folks out there that run businesses that way, and unfortunately the track record of things that they solve which benefit them is not good. So you really have to start with yourself. You have to know yourself well enough to know that if I get hit with some really disturbing news, I've almost got to know in advance how I need to shift gears between just reacting to what I hear and taking a pause and going through my strategic decision-making process, so that I can come up with a solution that I'm going to be happy with when it's over.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a really good book on that. It's called Unbeatable Mind. It was written by a former Navy SEAL, and then he went on to start a couple of businesses. And that's one thing that whether it's the Marine Corps or the SEALs or any type of special forces, they're really, really good at ingraining like that decision-making process to where it's so ingrained mentally that you can execute it under the most demanding of circumstances. But you can mimic that same process, and he talks about that in the book Unbeatable Mind. It's a really, really phenomenal book. But whatever your decision-making process is, if you just take this framework, the more that you practice it, the more that you'll be able to pull it out under stressful conditions that come up in business, and you won't reflexively come back to reaction mode all the time.
And that's a perfect example of what I call muscle memory. You've heard of that before. When you're training, when you're doing anything that requires you to be instinctual in how you act, it's all based on practice. It's all based on fine-tuning your own process in a practice sort of way, to where when you really get into a situation that's tight, maybe you don't have enough time that you feel to go through all of the steps we've talked about. Instinctually, you will know how to get through it because you've gone down that path well enough, and hopefully you won't make any real big mistakes because you've missed a step that could be critical to finding the right solution for the problem you're trying to address.
Yeah. So I'm just going to sum up kind of where we've been so far, and then I want you to leave us off with kind of the main core point that you'd like to get across, one thing to leave us with. So number one in the framework is it actually a problem? Is it something that you should be spending time and money to fix? Who's driving the message? Is it something that is urgent to them but isn't really all that important to you? Is it an external problem that everyone in your business faces? And then what really is that core issue, and getting clear. So that's kind of that 4-step framework that you take your clients through to help them attack their problems, and it's something that you can replicate not just in your business, but really in every area of your life. So what's that one thing that you'd like to leave everyone with if they're facing an issue in their business today and they're really not, they're really not sure where to start? All they know is they're in reaction mode. What's the very first thing they need to do, and the key thing that they should take away?
Well, the key takeaway from this is if you can learn how to almost push the pause button on your own head and get yourself somewhat at a distance from the emotional heat that you're feeling from the problem. If you can learn how to do that and at least get yourself to the point where you can kind of almost like an out-of-body experience, you can look back at yourself and the problem and say, okay, here's what we have. Now let's think about what we need to do with that. That level of calmness in approaching it can really help speed up the clarity aspect, being able to really weigh in on all the options to determine which ones are real and which ones are just kind of illusionary, and being able to make a choice over whatever available options are, because you've distanced yourself from all the emotion that can cloud your judgment. That's the thing that if you take away nothing else from this video, then do that. Figure out how to disengage the emotional response so that you can look critically at what you're dealing with, and that will help you tremendously.
Yeah, that is a huge key, and it's an emotional and mental self-discipline that it carries over into every aspect of your life, and it just makes life a lot easier if you can stay out of reactive mode as much as possible.
Totally.
So. Well, good. So, Steve, if anyone's interested in reaching out to you, if they're looking for a different perspective, if they want to reach out to you for the fact gathering phase, for a different perspective on their problems, some things that you've experienced in other industries, how can they reach out to you?
You can go to my website, and my phone number and my email address are on there in the contact area. You can contact me directly at 949-951-9163. I'll be happy to chat with you. I chat frequently with a lot of colleagues and people I meet at networking for issues just like this. If you don't really want to take that direct step, on my website I have a service called Ask Steve. And it's a business advice service. And all you have to do is put in the issue you're trying to deal with and send it to me, and within 24 hours I send back the things that I think you should be looking at and help you kind of move through to the evaluation, maybe the decision-making phase of your problem. So you've got two choices in how you utilize me and the resources that I have, but all I'm going to say is if you've got something nagging at you, just don't sit with it. Do something with it to start this process, because believe me when I tell you, when it's all done, you will be much happier for it.
Well, very good. Well, I've enjoyed it. I think people got a lot out of this one, and I would encourage everybody to do that. Definitely check out the website, growthsourcecoaching.com, and join us for the next Business Transformations on Air. We'll probably have a special guest that we're going to interview along with Steve, so that's going to be really good, as well as any future ones like this where they're one-on-one interviews. They're so packed with really useful, practical advice that you can implement in your business today. So I love doing these. I love co-hosting with Steve. So I'm looking forward to the next one. I hope everyone can join us. And for the next one, make sure you submit your questions. We'd love to answer them live on air. So with that, Steve, thanks so much for joining us.
Matt, thank you for hosting this thing. They're always, they never feel like a like a broadcast. It feels just like a really good conversation.
Yeah, likewise. Love it. Thank you so much, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.
Take care.